Hey everybody, this is Chris with Simple Tech coming at you with this week's Simple Tech tip where we are providing you with stress-free IT. So one of the promises we made in one of our other videos, we were talking about security and privacy, was really, we didn't go over the privacy tab section because I wanted to kind of create an individual video on that. So it's going to be kind of like security and privacy part 2, but privacy focused today. So we're really going to open that security private system preference pane, and we're going to go into that privacy section. We're going to talk about what all these different options are because they're actually incredibly important if you are using third-party apps on your Mac. Because a lot of these apps these days need permissions. So for instance, if you've ever installed Zoom, you had to give it microphone permissions, probably screen recording permissions. If you've used just Dropbox, you've had to give it accessibility permissions. If you're using SMB for sharing with Windows and all that good stuff, you actually have to give a text permission in there and stuff like that as well. So it can get a little complicated, but you got to know where to start and where some of the roadblocks you might encounter come from if you're installing third-party apps and the permissions they may need to work properly. So if you're ready to learn more about the privacy section, hop on your computer and let's get started. All right, well, thanks for continuing with us here. So let's take a look at the privacy tab. So as you can see, I have system preferences open. So if you don't know how to get there, the way you can get there on every single Mac, go up to that Apple logo, top left-hand corner, system preferences. It'll open up, and then you're gonna go into the security and privacy pane, just kind of like how you see it here. Now, privacy. So privacy, like I was mentioning in the intro, is kind of where you are granting access for third-party applications to certain aspects of your computer. So you could see, such as location services or contacts or calendars, reminders, photos, and you have this nice long list that you kind of have here. I'm not gonna get into every single one of these, but I am gonna highlight some of the main ones that you'll run into as you're working on a Mac, such as locations, camera, microphone, accessibility, full disk access, and screen recording. Those are typically the ones that you run into most of the time for the basic users. And photos. Sorry, I just saw photos scrolling through and made me think, yeah, that's probably pretty important. So let's talk a little bit about location services. So as you can see right now, as I'm looking at it, on the right side of this pane, it's grayed out. So that just is because in the bottom left-hand corner, I do have it currently locked. So I'll click this lock here. And you can see I could use the password. I'm gonna use my Apple Watch and give it a little double click. And it's gonna unlock that security pane for me. And so now you can see here on this right side, I could actually have access to these different items under location services. So as we're looking at location services here, these are the things that I have given access to location services. The things with the check marks, mind you, not the things that are unchecked. So for instance, Spotlight doesn't know my location. Now, if you go back and watch our Spotlight video, which we'll put down in the description, there'll be some instances in there where maybe having a Spotlight location might be important, right? So like, especially if you put in an address in Spotlight and search. But you see some of the main ones. Fantastical is what I use as a calendar. Well, I put in appointments. I put in the address of where I'm going because it'll tell me when do I need to leave, just like the Mac calendar. Or it'll say, hey, this is coming up in 20 minutes, you gotta get out, and you gotta drive. I could actually click on it and get driving directions in there as well, but it's not gonna work properly if I don't have the location services turned on. Voice Memos has location services. You can see Apple Calendar, Apple's Wallet. I already mentioned Spotlight. Safari's location services. If you're using a third-party browser, such as Google Chrome, that'll need to have location services if you like to turn that stuff on. Messages, maps obviously you're going to want to have location services on, right? Twitter, Apple TV, Siri and dictation. You can see again, I mentioned Google Chrome. I use Chrome, so that's on there. And there's ones that I don't feel need it. Loom, why does Loom need to know where I'm at, right? It doesn't. So you can kind of come through and set those up. So you check the box next to the item that you want to have to know what the location. Now the system services is kind of important, and you got details here. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on these details. So you can see where it says, allow system services to determine your location, such as your time zone, such as significant locations. And you can see that has a details button as well. Significant locations are locations where you're at frequently, right? So like it knows my home, it knows my work, it knows probably where I drop my kids off at school, or maybe it, with on-device learning on your iPhone with system significant locations, it might learn that, hey, when you're at this particular location, these are the apps you tend to use all the time. So when you go to search for an app on your phone, as an example, it goes, well, here, when you're usually here, these are the things that you use. So significant locations kind of comes into play a lot when you are using your device in certain aspects. So like a portable Mac would be a good example. You got a Mac laptop, you take it to and from work or out in the field for your job, and you do certain things on it. It's just going to identify those for you. Now, you can go in here and get those details. This computer that I'm on, it's a Mac Mini. It's always at my office, so it doesn't move. So it has no significant locations, right? Well, if I can click on done and get out of there. But these are all the other things that are used in your locations. Now, what's important too is if you want to know when your location is being used, you're going to want to check this box here that says show location icon in menu bar when system services request your location. I personally have that turned off because honestly it becomes an eye distraction for me because it shows up in the top right hand corner of your menu bar and it'll kind of pop up there. It'll be like a little triangle pointing to the, I guess you could say, the northeast, if you think about it in that regards, and show kind of location services are in use. Now I don't have that turned on, but if you want to see that so you know when your location is being used, definitely check that box and turn it on. So that's a little bit about it. If you want to learn more about location services and your privacy, click on this link here down here at the bottom and it'll open it up for you and show you some more. Now, contacts, same thing. You can kind of go through and set these up. So these are the apps I've allowed to access my contacts. So for instance, Twitter, when I launch Twitter and it uses, if I have a contact in there that happens to sign up for Twitter, I'll get a notification being like, hey, this person is on Twitter. And it'll, do I want to follow them? Do I not? So on and so forth. Calendars, what things have access to my calendars. Now, Fantastical is the calendar itself, but it also has access to my on-device calendar. Things is another program I use for to-dos and stuff like that. So I wanted it to have access to my calendar. Photos, I'm going to skip reminders because it's pretty basic. Allow the apps to access your photos. So maybe you use third-party editors. I'm trying to think of other instances where you might allow access to your photos. You'll run across this a heck of a lot more on iPhone than you will on a Mac when you are allowing access to your photos for certain things, such as Twitter or Instagram or something along those lines, where they're going to want to allow access to your photos so that way you could upload those photos and so forth. You can see here, I have not allowed access to photos on anything. Let's talk about camera. So camera is a little more important because nowadays with remote work or Zoom or whatever you're using for, WebEx, whatever it may be for your video conferencing and all that good stuff, if you haven't allowed camera access on your Mac, it's not going to work right? You'll just get let's use Zoom as an example because everybody knows Zoom and it became like a household name during the pandemic, right? You'll just have a blank black screen. You might hear audio because it might have prompted you to allow, the microphone and the sound to work properly, but you might not have video. Well, this is where you're going to want to go to make sure that you've allowed access to things such as Zoom. You can see Microsoft Teams is in here. Loom is what I'm using to record this video. I'm on a Mac Mini, I mentioned before, so it technically doesn't have a camera. But the way I have it kind of configured with my iPhone over here, I still have to give it access to use my camera. GoToMeeting, very much like Zoom, so on and so forth. So if you're ever having a camera issue where it doesn't seem that it's working properly when you are trying to use some sort of video conferencing software, WebEx, Zoom, Teams, whatever it may be, go here and check and just make sure that you have that checkbox next to it so that way it's activated. It's usually one of the first troubleshooting steps that you want to do when you have those problems. Now, one thing to point out, you don't see things such as FaceTime or Photo Booth in here. Those are Apple apps. Native Apple applications won't show up in this list. By default, they are allowed. So they will allow that automatically. So it's not something you ever have to kind of set up and configure. Now, if you do run a Mac that is got a camera built in, like an iMac or a MacBook Pro, MacBook Air, whatever it may be, when an app is launched that is utilizing your camera, you'll see a little green light next to your camera on it. So if you're sitting in front of a MacBook Pro right now, as an example, and you launch Zoom, you should see a little green light appear next to your camera notch up at the top. Same with an iMac. So that way you know your camera is actively used. This is important, I think, for people to know, so that way, I run into a lot of businesses that put like little covers on their cameras because they're afraid of security and privacy and somebody hacking their machine and getting to the camera. I am not aware of a way a hacker could turn off that light so that way it doesn't show. But that's a quick indication for you that like, hey, your camera's on, so watch what you do. Kind of like, hot mics, right? You don't want to accidentally have your microphone turned on and not know. And speaking of microphone, so again, same thing as camera. Apps that request microphone access, so that way it kicks on that microphone on the device and it can use it. A lot of applications that need the microphone access will actually have a pop-up that comes up and says, hey, would you like this to use the microphone? And all you got to do is hit allow or OK. And that typically will take care of this part for you. You rarely have to come in here for microphone access. And same with the camera access, I should say too. And grant it, usually it's just a pop-up that you have to agree to, and it takes care of it for you. And you don't have to come into system preferences. But again, good place to go if you know you're having an issue and like, hey, I'm in Teams, my microphone's not working. This is where you're gonna wanna head to first and see if it's been activated. But I talked about how the camera shows a little green dot on the camera, and I forgot to mention the microphone actually showcases in Control Center. So if you want to know a little bit more about Control Center, it's in the top right hand corner. It's in our desktop menu bar video, which we'll put a link to down below. So you can see here Loom is using my microphone. So when you click on Control Center, that's how you'll know what's listening. I'm going to jump down to accessibility. Accessibility is important in the sense that some applications need this turned on in order to function properly. Dropbox is the biggest one I see all the time. So, it's kind of scary because when you look at it, it says allow the apps below to control your computer. I just don't worry about that so much, but it's just you're giving permission for expanded use of your computer for these applications. And a lot of them won't work. Dropbox will not work properly if you don't enable it. You can see I use Splashtop for remote access to a lot of machines and actually into this particular machine if I'm not in the office. It needs accessibility access. Loom does. I don't have Google Drive turned on, but some things will ask for it, some things won't. And a lot of times, this is one of those ones where you have to go in manually, put in your password by clicking this lock down here and unlock it and selecting that access and making sure it has that access. Full disk access is another one that comes up that's pretty important. You can see I got a lot in here that do not have checkboxes next to them, but then I do have some that do, right? Dropbox doesn't need full disk access. It just needs access to the folder that I'm giving it access to. So I don't need to check that or whatever permissions I give it. Microsoft Excel, sorry, Microsoft, I'm not giving you full disk access to my computer. But Splashtop is an example, an important one for me if I need to transfer files to and from my machine, from when I'm remote, or to a client's machine, something I gotta have turned on. So certain things don't work properly, like Clean My Mac 10. We'll do some videos on Clean My Mac 10 because love this as a utility, so stay tuned for those, but this is one that needs full disk access so it can go through and see, check for malware. It could clean up and show you where storage, what's taking up all the storage on your system. And without giving it that full disk access, it can't help you with that. So again, something really important. Now, if you just want individual files and folders, this is where you can put them in there and you can see the things that I've given full disk access to show up in here as well. And the last big one I really want to touch on is kind of screen recording. Screen recording, kind of like microphone and camera, comes into play more with those video conferencing apps. So you can see Splashtop's here. That's a remote software. Loom, what I'm using here for this. You've obviously probably determined I don't have Zoom installed on this computer. I don't use this for video conferencing because it doesn't have a camera on it, but if I were to look at my MacBook Pro, you'd see Zoom in there, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, there's a laundry list of video conferencing utilities. GoTo, they would all show up in there because everybody uses different vendors, so I have them all downloaded, but I've had to give them screen recording access to function properly. So a lot of video conferencing ones will show up in this list for you. Now, if you have one that's not showing up that you need to give access to, if you've been kind of noticing as I've been going through, all of them have this plus minus down here at the bottom. This plus minus that's here will allow you to add an app manually that you've downloaded and installed if it's not coming in there. So like for instance, the first time I installed Splashtop Streamer, for some reason it wasn't populating in here. Usually it does automatically. So I click the plus button. Oh, if I can click on it, it's gonna load, right? It might not load your applications directly. If it does, you'll see over here, applications. You just simply come in here, find the application that you're looking for, and then you just kind of add it. So let's say like I wanna give Microsoft Teams open. So now I've just given Microsoft Teams the permissions for screen recording if it's necessary. And if you don't want it, you simply just click on it, hit the minus, and it removes it. So that's how, as you're going through all these different sections, if you've been kind of following along, that's been in every single window, you can add things manually if you needed to, or remove them if you're like, why is this here, type of thing. And so, sometimes you run into things that want Bluetooth access. You can see Google Chrome, Microsoft Teams. As Bluetooth devices communicate wirelessly more and more, they're gonna probably see this come up more often, where it wants to use that. Analytics and improvements, these are things, this is actually, that comes up during the setup of your Mac. It asks you, one of the questions is like, do you want to share crash and user data with Apple, anonymously, or do you want to share it with the app developers? This is where you can go through and say if you want to do that or not, or do you want to share your Siri and dictation information? So for some reason you're worried about privacy and maybe you have those selected and you're like, you know what, Apple, I don't want you having my Siri and dictation information, uncheck it. Keep in mind, you're just a number, so I wouldn't worry about privacy. Apple is huge on that, and it actually does help them improve the software. But if you're really, really worried about privacy, you're gonna wanna turn that off. And then the last one's Apple advertising. You can see I have personalized ads turned on. I'm like, look, if I'm gonna get ads, it's just the way the world is nowadays. Like, I at least want them to be relevant to what I'm doing. So that's why I have personal ads checked on, right? But if you want to turn that off, you can learn more about Apple's advertising and privacy policy here. So if you're really concerned about the privacy on the Mac, what apps have access to what data, when your camera is being used, when your microphone's being used, how it's being used, what is Apple seeing, like all these different things, this is where you want to go. You want to invest your time and take a little time and go through all these and question it. Like, why does Google Chrome need Bluetooth? That actually surprised me as I was going through it, and that's why I bring it up, because that's what went through my head when I looked at it was, why does Google Chrome need Bluetooth, right? I'm sure at some point it probably popped up on my screen and I just, out of just moving forward, just hit okay and didn't really think about it. But if you're really worried about privacy, definitely take some time to go through this tab. Now, one of the disclaimers I want to put out there, we're kind of done talking about the tab, but just something to know. If you are giving apps this access, this is third-party access to these items, such as the Bluetooth or your calendar location services. It is their terms and conditions you are agreeing to when you turn this on. So for instance, if you're worried that Google takes too much of your data and you enable location services for Google Chrome, just know that it is following Google's terms and conditions of how they use your data. It's not how Apple uses it or how they collect it. It's how that particular company is using it. So that's just kind of important, just kind of to know like who you're granting access to this information of yours, because as we all know, they sell it. You know, they're selling that information. It's a way they make money. They can give you relative content to things that are important to you, just like I mentioned with Apple's personalized ads. You know, so if you're not too worried about it, then sure, don't worry about it. But just know that when you do allow these functions to work, you are agreeing to the terms and conditions of that particular application, whether it's Google Chrome, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, whatever it may be. That's who's got your data and the terms and conditions you're following under. So I just wanted to kind of make sure that you knew that, because even though you think that it's your computer, it's actually the software that you're agreeing to in terms of that use. So thank you for watching. Please click the subscribe button if you want to keep up to date with all of our future videos, and click the thumbs up to let us know if you like this video. We also want to hear from you, so use the comment section below if you have any questions on our video or have videos that you'd like to see us create. We would love to make something pertinent to you, and thanks for watching.